You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking a question. Can a person change? Can someone actually, honestly make big changes in their life? You know, often we hear about how, well, a leopard can't change its spots. About a zebra can't change its stripes. But does that mean that we as people can't change? I'd have to argue with that. You know, I find that oftentimes people come into my office and they tell me that they believe that people cannot change, that they can't change, it's not in their nature. But again, I argue with that because I believe that people can make changes in their life. Lasting changes that work and last a lifetime, but it's up to that person to actually make that change stick. You know, I find it interesting because change is such a thing. You know, we talk about how they've changed, or she's changed, or she told me she's changed and I'm going to get back into the relationship and this is going to be so amazing because of all the change that's being made. But, you know, we really want to look at change and we really want to discuss change. How much change is real? What's the length of time for change? What's the length of time of change to stick and to be steady and consistent? And how do you know if someone's really changed? I mean, because I think that's one of the big questions is how do you really know if someone's really changed? In my office, I have folks that come in, they're having marital issues, relationship issues, and they take a little time off, and the first thing when they come in here is, I think they've changed. They told me they've changed, they've made all these changes, and my first response to that is, it's not a negative response. But my first response to that is an awareness type response. Making the person aware of the fact that change takes time. Okay? Change is not instantaneous. Change is not overnight. Change takes time. And when we think about that and we're real with that, we become more realistic about what somebody can honestly change in their life. You know, I have done some change in my life. When it comes to the core, though, when it comes to the core of my being, how I was when I was a kid, I think I'm more like that. And I think that we begin our life a certain way. I think most of us begin our life in a loving and happy way, but it's the environment, it's the impact of the dynamic of the family dynamic, it's the unhealthy upbringing. You know, it's all that goes into creating walls and division and fear and anxiety and depression and all those different things that happen when we are exposed to certain things that aren't good or healthy for us. And I feel that when prior to that exposure and consistent exposure, I think for the most part, many of us were pretty happy and healthy children. We were pretty happy and healthy. And I feel that oftentimes we have to go through years and years of pain and suffering. And we go through those years. And then eventually, as we work through with a therapist or a life coach or what have you, or, you know, with accountability group or an accountability partner or all that, we begin to what? We begin to take those walls down. We begin to realize what's holding us back. We begin to be more aware of the unhealthy relationships we have in our life. We become more aware of the unhealthy negative patterns in our life that are based on, a lot of times, what we were exposed to at a formative, at an early period of our life. And I've realized, though, that we can make bad decisions, negative, adverse decisions, right? Antithetical decisions to our value. We can make those decisions, and those decisions can put us on a course of a certain type of lifestyle, right? And I can give you an example of this. You know, oftentimes when we're younger, we go through a position of experimentation. Some people experimenting with drugs and alcohol, maybe both, maybe pharmaceutical drugs, kind of going on a path of self-loathing and maybe self-exploration, but also maybe some things that really inhibit us. Maybe some things that cause some negativity in our life. And oftentimes when we go down that path, we either continue to go down that path, right? A path that's taking us away from who we are, a path that's harming us to some degree, or we stop, or we turn it around. Do you see what I'm saying? But there has to be great change made to turn that boat around. But I think that prior to what was happening, prior to the issues, you weren't doing that. So you're basically changing back to a prior persona of you. Or maybe the original persona or that original spirit of you. So let's talk about that. So I know that many of you listening, including myself, we haven't always made the best decisions, right? We haven't always chosen the best paths. And sometimes we've gone down a path that we probably didn't need to go down. And I think for the most part, the majority of us, the majority of you listening, including myself, realize that that's not the way I wanted to go in my life. I realized that I had to make changes. I had to stop the action and the activity in the direction I was going, figure out why I was going that way, understand it, wrap my brain around it, okay? Figure out what was happening within myself and work on that to let go of the direction I was going and to head back into where I needed to go or to head into a new direction of where I wanted to be or needed to be or knew that was where I needed to go. And I feel that, this question, can people change, is so important, not just because of our life, your life change, but also marriage, relationships with folks coming into my office for therapy and coaching, defining that change, but also just looking in the news, right? Whether it's an appointment for the Supreme Court Justice, whether it's Bill Cosby, whoever it is, can people change? And I have a really interesting theory on that I want to share with you. And I'll be sharing with that in the next segment because I feel that people can change, but I think there's an adequate and specific timeline that we must look at. Because I believe that change is constant. I believe that without the ability to change, what do we have? Without the ability to grow, what do we have? What kind of hope do we have if everything's just going to be the same? I like Muhammad Ali's thought process on change. And he said, a man who views the world the same as 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. I think that's extremely profound. The way that I looked at the world when I was 20 is extremely different than I look at the world now. Extremely different. There was a lot of self-worth issues, self-esteem issues, even maybe some self-loathing issues. And I know I'm not alone in this. And that clouds your judgment. It colors the situation differently. It makes for not hopeless, not helpless, but it makes for a different feeling, a different set of structure, a different way of life. It makes it difficult and challenging because when we look at life through those glasses, it's hard to see where we stand. It's hard to make changes, and it's hard to feel as though we have the power to make those changes. Don't you think? And I find that if you look back at the way you thought about life back when you were 20 or 25 or 27 or even 30, to my thought process, I change perspectives and like shades of that perspective on a daily basis. I believe that if you're learning so fast right now because the world is moving so fast. And if you're learning and you're taking in and you're believing in the process and you're appreciating it, then I think at that point you're beginning to see things in a much more technicolor, more profound 4D kind of way. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's so powerful. And I believe, though, in my heart of hearts, and I've seen this to be true, and I've learned this from watching clients, I've learned this from watching my therapy clients, from being side by side with them, I've learned this from watching myself. A good therapist had to have gone through therapy with self to be able to help other people, okay? Seriously. Somebody that can help other people had to have helped themselves and had to have walked themselves through, okay, the dark forest into the light and figured out exactly how did I walk that, how did I talk that, and what did I do, and how can I help someone else do exactly that? Because it worked out for me, how can I walk someone else through it? Okay, that's what I do. And I find it interesting because I know for a fact, because of my own life, because of my own issues, that real change takes work and dedication. And there's so many people out there that choose to do it, but others who choose not to change because they don't want to do the work. Stay tuned when I return to me talking more about how people can change and my thought process on defining the right amount of time that determines real change. Stay tuned because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
I'm ready to fly.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking the question, can a person truly change? Can someone actually change and change for the good and change forever? Okay. You know, oftentimes we see somebody that's changed, quote, unquote, and within a few months they change back, right? Or the talk of the change was all this talk, but it really, really wasn't change. In reality, it was just somebody trying to get back into your life, a spouse trying to move back in, a girlfriend or boyfriend trying to explain that, yes, they cheated, but they've learned and they've gotten better and they've changed for the good, and take them back because they've done all this work, and now they just want you to take them back because they've changed. I've changed. Okay? So let's talk about that. Can a person really change? And right before the break, I was talking about my rule, my belief. And I have a rule, and I call that the 10-year change rule. The 10-year rule. In order for somebody to really, really change, okay, and I'm a big believer in this, you had to have literally gone 10 years not doing what you were doing that was so negative or so, self-loathing or whatever that was. And I find it very interesting. I know some people go, wow, 10 years? 10 years is a long time. I mean, I really do think 10 years. I mean, some people might go 7 years because that's as long as the IRS goes back on your taxes, right? But I think 7 to 10 years, and I really believe in the 10-year rule, because when somebody has really made a change, so let me give an example. When somebody has gone through rehab for drugs and alcohol, lived soberly, okay, been to accountability meetings, done all that stuff, spoken with groups, been there to help other people. I believe that someone that's been sober for 10 years is sober and will be sober. Yes, could something happen to that person in their life? Could there come the death of somebody or a deep depression? Sure. But for the most part, I think that 10 years specifies that this person has learned from the situation, they have moved on, and they have changed their life. When people ask if criminals can be, if they can, change their life, and what can they do, and when do you believe that somebody has actually changed their life for the better? Well, I believe, if somebody went to jail and did the time and came out, and you're talking about rehabilitation, I think it's easy because it's easier to go back to a life of crime because it's what you know. Okay, and I think this is a good example. So in order to not go back to a life of crime, there's a lot of things that have to be done. You have to change your entire people, places, things. You got to change the people you spend time with. You got to change the places you go. You got to change the things you do. You got to change your whole lifestyle. It's a lot like with drugs and alcohol. When somebody's addicted to drugs or alcohol, they go through the rehab process. Nowhere in rehab and nowhere in sober living does anybody say, okay, when you get out of here, you go back to the same place you were at, you hang out with the same people you did drugs with, and you'll be fine. Nobody says that, okay? Because you can't. Because it's hard to change. It's hard enough to make real change, significant change, life-altering change and be around other people that haven't changed. Okay? I mean, remember what I just said. That's powerful stuff. You can't expect to change your life and literally make these huge life changes and be around people that haven't changed, that are still living the same lifestyle, and you think you're going to get off scot-free and nothing's going to come to you? I mean, that's almost impossible. People say that you're like the 5 people you hang out the most. Interesting stuff there. Think about the 5 people you hang out the most. Who are they? Okay? For the most part, it's me, myself, and I don't know, just kidding. But seriously, you can't expect to change when you're around an environment and around people that haven't changed, because it's almost impossible. You have to make a lifestyle change. And with that lifestyle change, that's real change, and it takes real work. It takes real dedication. It takes overcoming one's fear. And so many people don't choose to change because they don't want to actually do the work. Or they're scared to do the work. Or they're fearful of what's going to happen. Or they're fearful of the future. Or they don't know how they're going to be. Or they don't know how they're going to look. Or they don't know how everything's going to work out. And so they go back to the old routine because that's what they know. I mean, how many of you have gotten back in old relationships, romantic relationships, that didn't work in the first place, and now you're back in it again because, you got fearful of living alone, you didn't want to be by yourself, you get back in it, and it's even worse than it was before. It's either hasn't changed or it's worse. And you went back to it because of why? Because of fear. Because fear takes over in our life, and it pushes us back into the old ways of doing things. Fear is a very interesting thing because fear makes us do things that are just idiotic. I have a good example of how fear can make us do things that literally just are not intelligent. I was recently on a trip, and a lady that I know was driving me, and she has a driving service, a car service, works for a car service. And she was telling me, she goes, "Oh, I forgot to tell you." She goes, "The other day I picked up this lady at 8:30 in the morning, and she needed to go to work." And she goes, "And I was hauling. I was trying to go as fast as I could." And so she was driving. Now, this is in Los Angeles. And anywhere in the big cities nowadays, traffic is a huge deal. Traffic is big. And if you're needing to leave for work and you're in a huge city and you're having to take the highway, you need to leave a lot earlier than 30 minutes ahead of time. So anyway, so she's driving this lady. They're on the highway, and she's going to exit off and use the Waze program to try to get there faster, to try to, to cut down some of the time. And the lady's like, "Hey, I'm late for work. I'm going to be late for work. I'm stressed out." And the lady was scared that she's going to lose her job because obviously this isn't the first time that she was late for work. Okay? Not the first time. And she was kind of panicking, a little stressed out. And the lady that I know that was driving said, "Keep it together. I'm going to get there as fast as I can. I'm going to exit right now, and I'm going to go down this street and that street, and we'll be there in 5 to 7 minutes. It's only 2 miles down the road." So she exits the highway at the red light, about to make the right, and the woman literally opens the passenger door, grabs her briefcase, and goes, "I'm out of here. You've taken so long. I'm going to be so late for work. I'm going to lose my job." Slams the door, kicks the door in, and starts walking down the street. Now, this woman has another 2 miles to go. 2 miles to get to work with a briefcase and heels. Rush hour traffic, 2 miles. It's going to take her at least 24 minutes to get there when it would have taken 5 to 7 minutes by car. Now, you see how fear got in the way of making an intelligent decision? Well, that's what often happens to us when we're fear of the unknown, fear of the things that we've never tried, fear of the change, fear of being alone. All this stuff is very interesting because it all goes together. When it comes to relationships and happiness and gratitude, nothing can be compartmentalized, by the way. Nothing. Everything has to work together. Everything has to streamline. Everything is connected, directly connected. And real change takes work and dedication. And I find that very interesting. And I find it highly important to understand because I think that oftentimes when people think about change, they're normally changing or they're talking about the change because somebody in their life is unhappy with them. Something they're doing in their life is causing unhappiness to other people, and people are telling that they need to change. They're telling them they need to change. And so the person's like, okay, well, they want me to change, so what do I do to just kind of fake it till I make it or whatever, make them think I've changed, or what do I do? And then they'll take me back in good graces, and this will all be over, and I can go back to living the life I was living, which that's not change. That's being an imposter. That's lying. That's basically like, I'm going to placate you because I want you to think that I've changed. I don't really want to do any work. I don't want to do any work. I don't want to take responsibility for my actions. I don't want to take responsibility for my life. And I just want to kind of just, slide by as easy as possible without you getting on me. Without you riding me or getting on me about what I am and am not doing, right? And so before we head into this next break, I want you to think about it. Do people really change? Yes. I believe that we're constantly changing. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I mean, heck, I don't know if you know this, but the cells in your body change about every 7 years. Okay? So if the cells are changing every 7 years, you can definitely change, but you got to put the work into it. You've got to believe, first off and foremost, that you can change, because if you believe that you can't change, then you can't. We can only do what we believe. We can't do what we don't believe. Do you understand that? Because your brain makes up the rules of the land. If it says you can't change, then there is no change. If it says that you can change, then you do have the opportunity to change. If you haven't already, check out my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, put in Ashley Burgess, Ashley, Berges, and don't miss every week new video content on my channel. And don't forget to subscribe, because if you subscribe, you'll find out about the latest, greatest, and you'll always be in the know. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking the question, can a person honestly change? And I'm a big believer in the 10-year rule, that after 10 years, if somebody has made a huge life change, that they have made that change forever. And I believe that we have to look at change and understand that change takes great time, effort, dedication, and personal work. I can't just say, hey, I'm changing or I changed, and I don't expect you to believe that, because it really didn't happen that way. Change means that you have worked on yourself. You're constantly working on yourself. You're constantly putting in the time, putting in the effort, and doing what's needed to be done to really adequately make some amazing change. And I think that this is a powerful place to be. Because we are constantly changing physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and like I was saying before the break, how the cells in the bodies change every 7 years, about every 7 years, okay? And brain studies reveal that the neuroplasticity enables you to change the neural pathways, and when you're changing that, you also change habits and behavior. And we can talk more about that, but it's very interesting. But just like our body changes, we can change our habits, we can change our behavior, we can choose to. I believe that when someone says that change cannot happen, a person cannot change, I believe that that's a person trying to get off the hook from change, or they're just self-limiting, because we have the power to do anything. I mean, we have the power to do anything. Why should we limit the fact of what we can do? And I think there's been a lot of research in mindfulness as well, because as we become more aware, as we become more mindful, okay, as we take more responsibility for our life and our actions, that's powerful stuff right there, guys. That's powerful stuff. I mean, how many of you have been in relationships with people who did not take responsibility for their issues? Okay? How many of you were in those relationships for a long period of time and literally hit your head on the side of a wall every day because nothing was going to change? Okay? And how many of you finally said, you know what, I'm tired of this. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. And how many of you are still in the relationship every day cringing because nothing has changed? It's very interesting stuff. Do you see what I'm saying? But once we become more mindful, and once we surround ourselves by people who are also mindful, but also people who are what? Responsible. When I find that somebody is not responsible for their actions and they're telling me that everybody else is the reason for the problem, I realize that this person doesn't take responsibility for their actions. And I try to distance myself as fast as possible. Because eventually something's going to happen. And if they don't take responsibility now, when are they ever planning on taking responsibility? You see what I'm saying? And I've also found that you can bring that up to their attention. And some people might get it. Some people might become aware. Some people might begin to realize it. But if you bring it up to someone's attention over and over again and they argue with you and they fight with you, eventually you have to determine yourself, is this who I really need to be around? But also go inward. Why am I choosing to be around this? Why am I choosing to accept this in my life? Because what I found is that we choose to accept things in our life, good, bad, or indifferent. And those choices are based on our beliefs about ourselves and our beliefs about our life. And those beliefs about ourselves and those beliefs about our life can be very limiting, or they can be very awakening and beautiful and awesome. But I found that more people have self-limiting beliefs than the opposite. And that's because of our upbringing. That's because of the environment, our family dynamic, parenting, all those types of structures. Do you see what I'm saying? All of that. Because oftentimes our family, they did the best they could for the most part. Some of you had some really horrific family dynamics. Other people had really amazing family dynamics. I find that most people are somewhere kind of in the middle, okay? And there's very different shades of gray, black, and white. And there's different shades of good, bad, and indifferent. But the interesting part of that is the fact that we don't know the difference when we're young. We don't know the difference because we're just around it. We assume that everybody has it. We assume that it's normal. It's our normal, even though it's our unhealthy. Do you get what I'm saying? And I think that's very powerful. And I think that when we become more mindful in our life and realize from tragedy, realize from our past, overcome that type of adversity, we begin to realize and see the avenues of how we can make better decisions and how we can regulate our emotions better. Not fly off the handle, not freak out, not go into rage, go into road rage, go into anger, fear, all that stuff. Be able to calm it down and self-soothe and make those better decisions. It's very powerful. When we begin to make better decisions, and decisions that are not self-harming and decisions that don't harm other people, and we begin to regulate our emotions and realize where these emotions are coming from and understand ourselves, we begin to be very powerful people in a very amazing, positive, clean way. And in that clean way, we're able to make the changes in our life that we need, and we're able to be aware of things that we need to change. And it's interesting in that it's so interesting and so powerful because I found that the closer you get to who you are, the more that you can see little changes that need to be made, and the more valuable that becomes, and the quicker the changes can be made because there's not so much that needs to be done. And it's a very powerful position, and sometimes you might get down on yourself, you might get upset, you might get fearful, but I ask you at those times to step back and ask yourself, why am I getting fearful? Why am I getting down on myself? Why am I internalizing this? Because this is taking me off course, it's getting me out of my mindfulness, it's taking me out of the moment, right? It's putting me back into the past, or it's putting me in the future of the unknown, and all of these things are scary. Because for many of us, we made many decisions in our past that were not positive. We made decisions in our past that were negative. We made decisions in our past that hurt us. You know, a good example is somebody choosing to get married and having to go through the divorce process and looking back and saying, gosh, what was going on in my head? Why did I do this? I can't believe this. You know, if I could get duped into this, I could be duped into anything. I can't even trust myself. I mean, why do I think that I can make this change when I couldn't even simply do this? And you see how that negative self-talk just overtakes you into a position of, well, what? Inability to make decision, the fear, scared. the self-questioning and self-ridicule that puts you in that downward spiral. All these things that take you out of the power position and make you question yourself. You know, I find it's very interesting when you look at the common themes and spiritual practices throughout our country and every country and throughout history of our time. You know, there's a belief that we as humans can raise our awareness, our conscious awareness, and that we can raise our awareness. And by doing that, we can live a life at a higher, more fulfilling, more fulfilled level. And I believe that to be wholeheartedly true. And so that's why I believe, again, that people can change, because I believe that we can change. That's a common theme throughout life. And, you know, if you look at a movie, if you look at the protagonist and the antagonist, you look at all this stuff and you look at how, you know, the hero has got to go through this trial and tribulation, and they have to make some personal changes, and they have to overcome this, and they have to overcome this, and they have to go over this and that, and, you know, overcoming adversity and overcoming their own personal challenges and doing all that, and then getting to that next level and succeeding. In order to succeed, the person had to make changes, had to deal with adversity differently, had to overcome the self-loathing, the self-esteem issues, the self-worth issues, had to go inside and tackle those demons and turn around and make things work. But had the person not had changed, had the person not seen that they have to change or need to change, then what would happen? The same thing. The same stance, the same status quo, nothing changes. Life continues going on the same way. Every time adversity comes, pow, person's down again. Pow, pow, pow. Eventually that goes into some sort of depression. Do you see what I'm saying? Or the person keeps saying, other people are doing this to me, and not taking responsibility for what they can change. Because a lot of times, often, when we don't want to take that responsibility, when we see it as everybody else's, we see that because we don't want to change, or the fear of not wanting to change, or the fear of all the work that will have to be done to make that change. And I feel that when you're ready to make these changes, it comes to you very quickly. And maybe it hasn't really been that quick. Maybe it's been a period of several years or a lifetime. But when you finally do realize the need for the change, it almost feels overnight that you got to make that change. You know, and some of you have made some major changes where you've quit smoking, quit drinking. You've gotten out of abusive relationships, right? You stopped beating yourself up mentally and emotionally. You got out of an abusive, physically abusive, mentally abusive marriage or relationship, and you've moved on, and you've realized the cycle that you were in, and you realize the cycle you were in before that, and the cycle before that, and the cycle before that, and you've worked to rectify those situations and to figure out what brought you into those cycles and what was within you that put you into those relationships, because it's not a one-sided street. It takes two people to tango, right? When I return, I'll be talking about more about change and how somebody can specifically change their life beginning today. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with me, Ashley Burgess. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Today's question: can a person change? Can someone truly and honestly change? And I think they can. I think that change is inevitable, but change has to be consistent, and lasting change has to be exemplified over a long period of time. You know, recently in the news, they've been talking about, you know, various issues with this recent Supreme Court justice and what has happened. And I find that people do things when they're young, and that doesn't necessarily define them, but I think that it has to be shown by a benchmark of time. No matter what it is, whether it's drugs or alcohol, sexual deviance, whatever that is, there has to be a significant amount of time since somebody's done that to prove the fact that the person has honestly changed. And I find that very important because I think that when we start looking at somebody and piecemealing it out and breaking them down and bringing up stuff from, teenage years and all that kind of stuff, I think we begin to have a slippery slope effect, because I think that that means that nobody could ever do anything wrong, period. And we as individuals and human beings, we make mistakes, right? We do things that aren't always the best. We do things that there's some guilt and shame with. And you either make the changes and you change your life and you try to better yourself, or you don't. You either put the work in and you really get consistent and you get mindful and you really work on yourself and you do some really deep spiritual practice and you become more consciously aware and you work at it on a daily basis, or you don't. Okay? It's just that simple. It's just that simple. And anybody that says that they've changed in a matter of months or weeks or days, they haven't changed. They might be employing a new perspective or a new, perception of life and a new perspective, but they haven't changed. They're just kind of trying to figure out how to change their actions. Real change takes years. And over that time, consistency, belief, understanding of why one's changing. I think that introspection is highly important and highly underrated in our society today. I find it very interesting how many people say, I don't go to therapy. I've never gone to a therapist. I don't think that's something you want to be really proud of. I really don't. And whatever you want to call a therapist, you want to call him a therapist or a psychologist or a life coach or whatever you want to call him, I think is great. But I think everybody needs a sounding board. And I think that when we actually do that, it can be very resounding and very powerful to make changes in our life and to really understand where we're going. When we become introspective, we become more versatile. We become more a part of the consciousness. We begin to understand why we do what we do. We begin to understand what got in the way. We begin to understand the things that hurt us when we were growing up. We begin to realize the things that we can change. We begin to realize the stuff that we're doing. We begin to take responsibility for our actions. We begin to do the right thing. And we reinforce ourselves to continue to do the right thing. It's interesting how when we become more introspective, we take that time to be reflective. We take that time to be quiet. We take that time to analyze ourselves. We take that time to get close to ourselves. We take that time to get to know ourselves. There was a time in my past before I got married that I took a year off. I took a year off from dating. I took a year off from sex. I took a year off. And I learned a lot about myself. And it was very painstaking and painful in the very beginning because I hadn't taken that time to learn. I mean, come on, I was celibate for a year. How many people can say that? And it's interesting because I learned so much about my life. And I learned that I was jumping from relationship to relationship without ever learning about me. And then I started realizing that it wasn't everybody else. I mean, I knew it wasn't everybody else's problem. I knew that part of the problem lay with me. I wasn't part of the solution. I was part of the problem, and I knew that. But I began to realize specifics, and I began to understand what I needed to change, and I began to embrace myself, and I began to cultivate a relationship with myself, and I began to understand myself in a way that I had never understood myself before. I became highly introspective. I became highly aware and highly mindful. And the more mindful I became, the more I understood where other people were coming from. And the more mindful I became, I understood that when I made a false step, or I made a misstep, really, when I made that misstep, why did I make that misstep? Oh, because of that. And so I have to rectify that and let that go and move on in my life. And it's so powerful. And it takes time and effort, and it takes mistakes and learning from mistakes and cultivating that knowledge and realizing, you know what? I'm going to make mistakes, but that's okay as long as I'm learning from them. And I took a lot of time to be quiet. And I took a lot of time to be reflective. And I took a lot of time to understand who I was, because that went a long way to my personal change. And that demanded honesty. And I had to have courage, because fear wants to try to get you back in that old state of mind. I had to have the courage to challenge myself. To challenge myself to be better. To be better. And I had to challenge myself to raise myself to a higher standard. And I had to be better than I was yesterday. Not better than other people, but better than I was yesterday. And that took a lot of tough learning. It took a lot of things, and it took me to say no a lot. It took me to move on. It took me to be quiet. And you know what it really took me? Is to really look at myself and to figure out self-love. And when I began to love myself unconditionally, I realized that the stuff that I was doing to sabotage myself was not good, was not positive, and it wasn't love. And when I began to value myself, I began to value what I did. I began to value my word and my deed and my actions. And I began to realize that those also needed to be raised to a higher level. And I've made mistakes, sure. But you know what? You learn from them. And they stand out. And sometimes they can be painful. And it's interesting because you learn from it and you'd like to rectify that, but sometimes you can't go backwards. You just have to learn from it and move forward. And so if you're talking about change right now, the only way that someone can do and create lasting change is what I just talked about. And if you have somebody in your life talking about how they're making these great changes, you've got to sit back and let them make this change for a long period of time and then discover, is this a lasting change? If you want to make a lasting change, remember that it takes a lifestyle change, a mindset change. It takes you to be mindful and aware. But it also takes you to apply that effort and to really work on yourself and not look to other people, not get distracted by other people, not judge yourself against other people, because that's easy. It's about looking at yourself honestly and saying, what can I make a change? How can I change? And how can I make this a forever positive change? Be the change that you want to see in the world. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.